Test, test. Give you a minute to sit. You want to grab food? Anyway, okay, I'd like to welcome everyone. We're good to go on recording. Okay, awesome. Welcome everyone to the January 3rd, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. And we'll go ahead and start with our work session. We have a couple of items to discuss. The first is project ZTA 23005 to talk about some zoning text amendments. And then 3.2 project ZTA 23004, talking about the sports court ordinance. So we'll go ahead and get started with the text amendment.
Yeah, that's great. Let's dive right in. So a little bit of context here. Commissioners may recall, I think it was last April, we did kind of a first chunk, if you will, of this type of edit. It's just meant to be kind of an ongoing cleanup of discrepancies or conflicting provisions of our code. For better or for worse, these tend to kind of get shelved and then they build up as we have more pressing applications come through. But we wanted to start the new year off with a good bite out of that list. So Ian has a section of these and I have a section of these. We kind of tag teamed this project. So I think I'll just share my screen and kind of start walking us through it. And then I'll turn it over to Ian once we reach his. So instead of doing separate slides today, I decided it would be, I think, best to just use the staff report and the memo that was in your packets. So I am going to walk through that and see if I can get my mouse to cooperate here. Probably just take a little bit of time to load. I wonder if I'll need to close out actually. Yeah, sometimes if I've opened it in a different room, when I go to reopen it, it doesn't take kindly to that. So let me try one more time. And I think some of these will require a little bit more probably conversation and others are really straightforward. So up to you guys on if you want to pause throughout and take questions on each one, or if you want me to go through it straight through and then do questions after. But the first one we're going to talk about is pet boarding establishments. So this was actually included in the April 2023 chunk. We had it in there as dog kennels, and the commission gave great feedback that y'all wanted us to think through a little bit more, maybe which zones it was going to be allowed in. I don't know if this is ringing a bell for anybody, but I think at the time in April, we had proposed that dog kennels be allowed anywhere daycares were, and that's kind of how historically it had been done. What we've proposed instead in this version is to broaden the terminology, first of all, to pet boarding establishments. Since, other pets can be boarded, not just dogs, and to only allow commercial pet boarding establishments in the regional commercial zone. We felt that was most appropriate for kind of like the scale of those operations. They tend to be a little bit larger, need more space. And then in this draft ordinance, we also have included some draft regulations for home business type boarding establishments. That was kind of a point of confusion in the past. So let me walk through that. This first part you see here is adding in commercial pet boarding as a conditional use in the regional commercial zone. So it would be allowed in that zone, but through a conditional use process. So it would have to come to Planning Commission for approval of the business license, unless a commercial pet boarding business had already been licensed at the address in the past. And then what you see next in the draft is a definition for commercial pet boarding. We've defined it as a commercial establishment with indoor and outdoor space in which domestic and licensable pets, as defined in our city code, are housed on a daytime and or overnight basis. And we've also said that establishments could include things like grooming, training, and maybe some retail. That seems to be pretty par for the course for those boarding places to offer those services. And then we've included some regulatory language on the number of pets on site, the facility size, and also kind of an overnight emergency plan. So maybe to avoid reading it verbatim, I'll explain the number of pets on site. We have used a ratio that was included in other cities' codes and other county codes of saying you can have, you need to have one caregiver on site for every 10 animals you have boarded. Caregivers have to be those staff members who are like dedicated to actually tending to the animals. It can't be staff members who are doing like administrative work or janitorial services. They have to actually be with the pets. For facility measurements, we've also regulated that by kind of with the number of animals. So we've said that each facility needs to have at least 60 square feet of boarding area per animal. That can't include ancillary rooms like kitchens, lobbies, storage rooms. And then we've given some language there on how large the crates need to be for the animals. Again, this language just came from other cities in Utah. We looked at Cache County as a county code and pulled that from there. And then also some best practices by some nonprofit groups. And then finally, the last part is just including an overnight or emergency plan in their conditional use permit submittal so that the planning commission can review how they plan to handle overnight care. Will there be a staff member overnight with the pets? Will they have some other sort of system where staff would be notified if there was an emergency? How would that work?
Do the staff ratios not apply overnight?
They don't need to overnight unless somebody does that as their plans. We haven't explicitly said that the staff has to be there overnight. From the research I did, and maybe we need to clarify that, from the research I did, it was not a given that staff would be there on site throughout the night. So
Typically aren't.
we could maybe above specify that that's for like daytime hours. I think would be good. So that is the commercial side of things, what we've proposed there. Maybe I can run through the home business side of things, and then if you guys want to pause for questions, we can. Keeping in mind, we have a fair number of these to go through, so use your time how you will there. For the home pet boarding ones, we wanted to give a little bit of regulation there because we do get questions often about doing home pet boarding operations, or we get questions consistently, I guess, about that. We have framed this in a similar way to home daycare operations, where we just split it into minor and then standard. So we've said that a minor home pet boarding operation would be up to 4 pets, and it would just include daytime, so no overnight. And then we've given some language here about the number of employees that can be there, signage, parking. Again, this is very similar to what is there for daycares. And then the standard home pet boarding would again only be daytime. We felt it was probably most appropriate for a residential property to not have overnight boarding as an option. And that would be between, so above 4 and up to 6 pets at a single point. And there's some ratios given there. So that in a distilled sense is what we're proposing for pet boarding. Do you guys have questions?
On the home side, how does that compare to what we do today?
So today, well, to be candid, we don't have a ton of information today about how to do it. We have some different licenses you can do if you want to like be a breeder or have exotic pets, things like that, but it's pretty unclear today. So we have often received the question like, can I just open a boarding establishment, have an unlimited number of dogs? Of course, that can create issues for the neighborhood of like lots of parking, concerns about pickups and drop-offs. So
the way it would work today, it is a type of home occupation, but where it's not specified with specific regulations. Basically, we've had cases in the past where a certain type of home occupation is proposed, and if that use is allowed anywhere in the city, then we can allow it or are entitled to allow it as a home occupation. By adding some specific language, we can put some guardrails on that. But if it came in today, the short answer is it'd be a conditional use application. We'd have to kind of analyze the exact case, but there's no
There's not a
The
lot
maximum or
to
minimum, like,
analyze it against, I guess. So we felt like, well, we were already tackling it for the commercial side, it just might be good to put some language in for the home side.
I think it's a good idea. I just had a couple of questions. Is it defined? And I did read this a couple of ago, so, but is it defined the hours
Oh, that's a good question.
for the home board?
Yeah, we just say daytime on there, that it can't be overnight. I don't believe we have in our business license chapter like a definition for that. So if that's something the commission thinks is important to include, you could look at that. I don't know if you want to be overly prescriptive
Yeah,
with time of day, but no, that's not.
I just wanted to bring it up for thought
Yeah.
because everyone's definition of daytime could go until
Yeah.
11 PM so
We do have one, I guess, touch point you could think about using is in some of the other commercial zones, there's some language around like vets. And it says you can't have overnight care, and I believe we've said before that needs to just be like standard business operation hours, so like 6 PM would be. So you might use sort of the standard, like,
maybe we want to say that. I don't know about saying an exact time, but standard business hours or something like that, I think would be.
yeah, I will say from a staff perspective, we're always a fan of having clarity on that, so we aren't asked like, well, what's daytime?
Yeah, and that's my concern.
Another thought, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Why not overnight?
So with overnight, we felt like it would have the potential to just be more of like a commercial level use than kind of a residential one. With the other home businesses, one of the, I guess, criteria that they're reviewed under is just keeping like the character of the neighborhood very residential. And so keeping it, I guess, for one, at a smaller scale with it just being daytime. And then we also had some discussion about, okay, if you have overnight, are you having dogs out in the yard? Are you having barking late at night? So that was the concern. You could argue the flip side of the coin and say if it's overnight, maybe you have less pickups and drop-offs. So
My real question is when my good friend asks me to watch his dog when he goes out of town, can I say no because of this?
I think that's probably a personal decision about your beliefs.
But if I keep the dog overnight, am I gonna be in violation?
I think that would be different than being licensed for like an ongoing home business. I don't think this is in any means
No.
trying to say like, you can't occasionally watch someone else's pet. I think it's more if you're looking to profit off of a business of keeping, a boarding session.
How many business licenses do we currently have that are utilizing this currently?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I don't do business license.
not many for
applications.
pet boarding. I don't know that we have any home ones currently,
So
but I
would
don't,
be grandfathered.
yeah, there could be some out there.
It could be a few, but I'm not aware of many. Thanks, Ian. Again, I think it was more, we were just like, well, while we're in here doing the commercial side of it, it might be good to think about the home side too and get ahead of it, so.
Mike,
One other thought to add.
Yeah.
As long as we're being sensitive about noise. This is certainly going to be a sensitivity about noise, and if we're gonna give a license, we ought to at least. Give the warning of the noise. limit.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We did put on item 3 in that sub list. We did specify that the pets should always be accompanied outside by a caregiver. To really try to avoid people just like letting out dogs and letting them run around and be loud. But I think it would be good to maybe, we could put language in there that says like in compliance with the county threshold, which is. So I have no issue adding that if the commission wants to.
Yeah.
Would it be, okay, if we move on to. some
Yeah,
other
let's
ones.
do.
This one was one of the bigger ones, so take comfort that the other ones are probably a little bit briefer. The next one,
One quick
Oh,
clarification,
okay.
the reason we differentiated minor at 4 and then standard is per code right now, you can have 4 licensed pets.
Yeah.
So anyone in the city can own 4 domestic pets, cats, dogs. There's a short list that are considered. So 4 is minor because that's no more than the amount of pets I could go register today without going through any process. Adding a few more onto that, 6 has a slightly different impact. And then it also includes the business owner, the property owner's own animals in that total. So I can't have 4 and then take 4 additional ones. It's a total number.
and that's the same way daycares are done, where if you have kids who are home with you throughout the day, they count toward the amount. So. Okay, good clarifications. Okay, so the next change is fuel price signs. Our signage code today has some language that addresses electronic signs and signs with changeable copy, such as like a fuel price sign where the price of fuel does change as things fluctuate. But it so far did not ever specify fuel price signs were allowed. So it said that you could have off-premise electronic display signs where they're allowed, which is an electronic billboard. And it said you could have time and temperature signs, which you see on some office buildings, but it never specifically said fuel price signs were allowed. We have historically used a zoning interpretation to say that's the same type of thing as a time and temperature sign. It can be included, but we wanted to formally clarify that and just add that in. So this would, in practice, not have a real tangible change. It's kind of what we do today. We're just calling it out in the code. And you'll see it reflected a few different places because the sign code reiterates passages a few different times. Okay, the bond section, I think looks really crazy, but it's because as we were cleaning up this section, we realized bond processing information was listed in at least 3 sections, and it gave slightly different information in each of them. And it created some confusion for anyone reading the code, trying to figure out how they were supposed to post their bond for their development or for their right-of-way permit. Bonds are typically required for both of those things. So what we've done is just tried to migrate all the bond information to Title III, which is, I think, finance and revenue, I want to say, is what that title is. And just put it all under one spot so you're not having to compare the procedures there. In practice, what we've typed here is not different than how we do bonds today. It just tries to encapsulate that and put it all in one place. So again, you see a lot of red lines here as we move it out of Title 19 and out of Title 12 and all into Title 3. But were there any questions you guys had about that?
Hold on.
Great. Okay, so then proposed change number 4 is related to accessory buildings in the Foothill Residential Zone. This is not a zone that much of the city falls under. Foothill Residential is kind of exclusively, I think, up on the east bench for some of the farthest east properties. But curiously enough, it doesn't say that accessory buildings are allowed, like a shed or a detached garage, although those are allowed in all other residential zones. So we did want to just add that in. This is not something we've had a big issue with. We just noticed it and thought it should be clarified. So we have said that they are permitted uses if they're incidental to a different permitted use, which basically means if they're secondary to like a main home, they're not a separate unit. They're just incidental to that.
So we don't have to say anything about ADUs here, right?
I don't believe that we do because we have our separate ADU chapter that
Okay.
clearly defines that.
Okay,
This wording is consistent with how it is across all the other zones.
okay.
So I think we're covered there. Okay, proposed change number 5. This is another one where there's not really a change in how things are done. It's just trying to provide better information for people reading the code. So each of the zones in Cottonwood Heights has a lot coverage maximum where it says this is the total percentage of the lot that can be covered by structures. But for properties that are also within the sensitive lands zone, that lot coverage figure not only includes structures, but also includes impervious surfaces like driveways, patios, walkways, that sort of thing. And historically, or I guess currently, these different zones have not given mention of that sensitive lands requirement. It would only be if you went into the sensitive lands code and read that that is the case. And so it has created some understandable confusion for somebody who says, well, I thought my property was just
So the audio went out a couple minutes ago. It looks like the main one's muted.
Here's Commissioner
Yeah.
Evelyn?
Yep, no, I can. Thanks.
Okay, we're back.
So sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah, if
No
there's
worries.
something we need to revisit, we can do that or also do it in the business meeting.
It's fine. I was following along.
Thank you.
So I'll move on to the next one. This one is Board of Adjustment fixes. When we came to you in April, one of the fixes that we made was removing some references of a Board of Adjustment in lieu of what we use now, which is an appeals hearing officer to handle things like variances and non-conforming structure applications. So this is just cleaning that up a little further and removing all the mention of Board of Adjustment that still exists within our code. I think this one only focuses on Title II, where the Board of Adjustment is still mentioned. Basically, what we're doing here is just crossing out Board of Adjustment and putting in appeals hearing officer. That's kind of the only thing here. So this is a pretty minor one. The next change is zoning map location fixes. This is another very minor one. Right now it states that the zoning maps are kept on file with the Planning Commission and in the custody of the city recorder. That's not true. They're a lot more accessible than that. They're available on our city website. And if someone came to City Hall, we have a giant printout we can show people of the zoning map as well. So we're just removing the statement that it's kept on file with Planning Commission and the city recorder, and just adding that residents can access zoning maps on the city's website or at City Hall after just requesting them from staff. The next one is rural residential zones accessory building fixes. So compared to other zones, our rural residential zones contain sort of different setback requirements for accessory buildings and what the code calls private garages due to the rural nature of the zone and the fact that a lot of these structures were built before the city was incorporated. So as staff, we review the zoning ordinances in our weekly meetings. And one of the things we discovered in those weekly meetings was that there's contradictory information regarding accessory building setbacks in the maximum height subsection of each of our rural residential zones for some reason. So we're just proposing fixing these inconsistencies and then relabeling private garages as detached garages because we feel like that's a more apt thing to call these structures.
We have no idea why there was setback information
that
in the
was-
height section,
Yeah.
but it not only isn't topical to height, but it also was giving a different setback guideline than what we actually use. So
Yeah.
I think it most likely was like a clerical error when the code was typed, but trying to fix that.
So I won't spend too long on that one unless you guys have specific questions about those restrictions. I think this is the last one, fencing clarifications. This one is a little more convoluted. So right now our city code is ambiguous with regards to fencing in the case of key lots. I sent you a diagram.
Yeah.
To kind of show what a key
We
lot
think
is.
it might be helpful if we pull up the diagram. So,
That's it.
oh, let me switch the screen I'm sharing. Sorry, you guys.
Send a screenshot. I don't know.
Yeah, we can do, okay, so there we go. So you see the key lots are listed there.
So the reason why this is an issue is because sometimes in these reverse corner lots, as they're called on this diagram, you have a property where you can see where my mouse is. The rear yard will be located here. And then the front yard of a key lot will be located here. And the reason why that's an issue is because in our city, we restrict the height of fences in front yards to 4 feet, but in rear yards, they can be 6 feet. And so where you have a lot line where it's one person's front yard and another person's rear yard, which rule applies? Do
Confusing.
you want to go back to the?
Yeah, let me switch back.
Okay.
So has everyone gotten the visual of what a key lot is? Perfect.
Helpful, thank you.
Yes, we had to pull one up ourselves as we were reading it, because we were like, is this what it's saying? It's a little bit hard to visualize.
So the funny thing is, when this was brought to our attention, we also noticed that our definition for a key lot was incorrect, which is great. So along with these other changes, that I'll go through in a second, we're proposing redefining a key lot to a definition that matches what the planning dictionary says, which you just saw in the diagram we pulled up on the screen there. So the key lot is not the one on the corner. It's the one,
Inset.
yeah, inset. So we're proposing supplanting that definition and then adding a provision for fences to be constructed up to 6 feet in the case of a key lot. So that person whose rear yard abuts the front yard of a key lot they still get the property right to build a fence up to 6 feet. They still have to meet all the clear vision requirements for safety. So if someone's driveway abuts someone's rear yard, they still need to meet that, is it a 30-foot?
Yeah, we didn't want to create a situation where by allowing someone to have a 6-foot fence, we're creating a visibility issue for someone backing out, but didn't want to deprive a owner of being able to fence in their rear yard at 6 feet. So we have proposed to allow the 6 feet, but still require them to set it back or step it down in height if there's a clear view circumstance.
And then we also noticed there was a loophole in the wall height extension process that would have allowed wall height extensions in the front yard, which is also not allowed in a different part of the chapter.
Yeah, there was just kind of some unclear language whereby someone could make an interpretation that you could apply for a wall height extension, which for maybe those members of the commission who are a little bit newer, the wall height extensions are a process where someone can say, okay, the code limits me to 6 feet in height. I'm going to apply for a wall height extension because I believe I have a unique circumstance where additional fence height is needed, maybe due to a grading change, a privacy issue. There are a lot of reasons. Those are only intended to be a possible avenue for side yards and rear yards. But some language in our code kind of gave an indication erroneously that you could do it in the front yard, which we have never allowed. We wanted to clarify that. So
Yeah, and we're also stating explicitly that a wall height extension cannot be granted in the case of a key lot. So even where the wall is in one person's rear yard or another person's front yard, the extension wouldn't be granted.
yeah, you maxed at 6 feet.
6 feet.
So yeah, this one was an interesting one where we went into it with one aim to correct one thing, and then we kept reading, and it was like, oh, there's some other issues here, so it's a little bit of a nuanced update, but you did a great job,
I
Ian.
think that's all we have though. If you guys have any questions.
Great.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
the end of the updates. So do we need to go back to anything? What a whirlwind of changes.
So a fence can be how high? 6 feet?
So in the front yard, oh yeah, let me scroll
And I'm
up
just
to
thinking,
this.
if you go down Creek Road, toward Fort Bush Lane, and there's some very nice homes there that have the wall right next to Creek Road. It's
Yeah.
10 feet.
Lexi Lane, yeah.
Yeah, there is an exception in here for estate lots. Where if you have an estate lot, which I think is defined as a lot greater than 1 acre, does that sound right, Mike?
Yep.
You can build a taller fence, so that would probably be the case on those larger lots. But for most properties in the city, you'd be limited to 4 feet in the front yard.
We do have a table in our city code that just kind of lays out the different height restrictions depending on what kind of lot you're looking at. We're just proposing adding key lot there, and then you can see you can go 6 to 8 feet inside of rear yards with a conditional use wall height extension permit, and 8 to 12 feet inside and rear yards with conditional use and neighbor consent.
You'll see the estate lot ones right here.
Yeah.
That particular fence is a rear yard and they got a fence height, they got a wall height extension, so that's an 8-foot fence.
There you
Yeah, I
go.
was gonna guess it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense too, if it's someone's backyard facing
Yep.
that street.
It's facing the street, so it's a,
Which is a sound barrier as well, which
Mhm.
I would want that too. If I lived
For
there.
sure, yeah. Cool.
Okay, any other questions? Great job, you guys.
Thanks for bearing with us. We really try not to choose so many at once, but it's a huge pain. But there's some issues. The code is old.
It makes sense. I
We
mean,
want to try to always make it more user friendly, always make it more correct. So
I don't
thanks
think
for-
this will be the last one.
Yeah.
I
We have a-
sense that's the case.
We have a matrix of all the upcoming ones, so just hold on to your hats.
Okay, great, thank
Are
you.
you good to share your screen for your portion?
Yep.
Okay. So the next item is to talk about the outdoor sport courts ordinance. And yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
I'll
so
let you.
staff doesn't have a ton to add. The ordinance is in the same spot it was last time. You'll remember we took initial public comment last time. The motion was made to continue the item. I think there was a desire to continue it to the mid-January meeting, just because Commissioner Mills and some others are gone. But we had to continue it to the next one. as
In
a
order
matter
to
of
continue
procedure.
it to the next.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the commission, no pressure to make a decision tonight, but it is on the agenda for that reason. If you want me to go over anything or answer any questions, I'm happy to. You received one additional public comment from Commissioner Shelton as with his resident hat on. And then two more came in after the deadline, so you will get those
Oh, okay.
after tonight's meeting.
All right.
Yeah, we have for anybody tuning in and just a reminder for the planning commission, for us to send you written comment ahead of the meeting. We do a cutoff of noon the day prior to try to make sure you guys have enough time to read the comments. So for any comments that are sent to us after that deadline, we send them to the commission after the fact. I will say, you know, if this is continued beyond tonight, those comments will still be very relevant. I think that could be another reason, but the benefit of continuing it is we continue to receive a lot of public interest in this.
Sure.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
we'll send those out tomorrow morning,
Okay.
those additional ones we got.
I don't know. Do you see nothing?
So, yeah, just procedurally, what I would recommend, discuss it all you want in the business meeting. You know, vote the way you want. I think we still should hold the public comment in case there are people here tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then just a reminder that if this is of interest, the moratorium was issued, I believe, in September. Those are a maximum of 6 months. That puts us into March. This is a legislative item, so it will have to go on and be deliberated on by the city council. If we hit that March deadline and the moratorium lifts, that's okay. It's just, we can't further restrict it. We'd have to try to get the ordinance passed, but March was kind of the timeframe we were shooting for. So we're still good time-wise there. We'll
Okay.
Continue to.
And maybe it's good to mention too, I think if the commission decides to continue it, we will just need a motion to do that with the date certain of January 17th, if that's what you want to continue to. So.
Okay.
I remember in the last business meeting, we were kind of trying to grapple with, do we need to continue it to this or to this? And I think if you do want to continue it, you'll just again want to stay the date that you're doing that to. So.
Yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, procedurally, it has to get taken up at the next regularly
Okay.
scheduled meeting. I mean, it can get continued forward, but you can only,
Just go one,
Yeah, that makes
just one
sense.
meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
well,
that's-
I mean, we can, but then it just gets tabled and it's killed, and then it has to get reintroduced, which I think defeats the purpose.
Okay.
It's
Yeah, we
still,
would- Suggest not doing that.
Yeah,
That's right.
I think that's,
I don't wanna start off-
I think we're all on the same boat on that one. So we've had some very valuable discussions about sport court and ordinance or no ordinance or where we go. And I don't know that do we want to re-engage in those discussions or how? I'm open to discussion.
I think maybe some questions. And I think as we look at this, I think some questions to ask are, what is similar to this that we have regulation for, from a land use standpoint? So what other similar uses do we have as a city or as a county or as a state that we regulate an activity like this in somebody's private property? So I think that's one of the questions that I would ask is, what would be similar activities that we as, you know, trying to abide to land use will be regulating, and are there any currently
Great question, yeah.
that we have in the?
So I would first clarify, we're not regulating pickleball in particular. This has become a regulation on outdoor sport courts in residential settings. So it's a
That's right.
structural regulation.
I think with that, it's more so of if you have a slab of concrete.
Mhm.
And you decide to change the use of that slab of concrete, it could be a barbecue grill concrete, and then it turns into a.
Sure.
I'm just trying to think outside of the box on this.
Yeah,
What
sure.
other areas
Well, and I think
do we have regulation?
I think you were also absent from the last meeting.
I
Is
was.
that correct? So if you want to revisit also any of the presentation, we can do that. It's,
I reviewed the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, so I reviewed the presentation and I was in the first meeting that
Okay.
this was brought up as well.
So just broadly, I would say it's similar to, without going through the conditional use process, the conditional use mechanism regulates uses in specific. So I could construct a building that houses a dental office that's a conditional use. Or I could propose a nightclub in the same exact building, and we are reviewing those two uses differently and imposing different standards on those. I think the idea here is we're starting with a minimum. If you want to just build a sport court and be permitted and not go through any additional study or regulation. The concern that was presented by the council to staff was the noise concerns that these generate. The way to mitigate that is with distance. You set it back That particular regulation is similar to how we regulate structures around sensitive land areas, fault lines, things like that. You regulate by avoidance. You create distance between the hazard and the structure. This isn't quite the same, but it's similar in concept. And then if you want to reduce that setback, you can do a noise analysis and propose some level of sound mitigation, some combination of mitigating practices to reduce that setback. If that study finds that the potential impact of the noise is substantially mitigated by whatever you're proposing.
I guess one parallel too might be something we just talked about, and it's not exact, but if we think there could be some noise nuisance issues from home pet breeding establishments. If we think that it's likely that there would be noise that violates that, maybe we do some regulations to try to keep that from happening, such as saying caretakers got to go outside with those dogs and kind of keep an eye on them. Like,
So I think it's similar, but I think the main difference is it's commercial use to, for both of those.
Sure.
It's commercial use to residential use. I think that that's going to be my main question is, commercial use regulations where it's like you're buying this, you know what your use is.
Sure.
You're going in, you've got to get a business license, you've got to go through, all of the natural steps for health and safety for that business license. For residential use, I think that that's more so of if there are any similarities.
Sure.
In current regulation.
Accessory buildings are allowed 3 feet away from property lines at a certain height. You can build them taller, but you have to increase your setback, regardless of whether it's a tough shed or a garage or a studio or whatever. So that that could be an example. An ADU, a detached ADU, is an accessory building, but it has a whole different process and
Absolutely.
requirements.
So, and I think it still goes into, you have to go through that process of, go through the building permit, go through the permit process across the board. Or with this one, I mean, any backyard, and then that's more so where I'm getting at with it is
sure,
any backyard can turn into a sport court. And whether that be, a 0.2 acre backyard or a acre backyard, whether it's one of those uses in general. I think that there's regulations, and I'm going to state that I think right now we have ordinances and we have ordinance officers as well that manage any noise level. So if there's a barking dog.
Yeah.
We can have that called on and, we then have, and this is just residential, it's not a commercial. If there's a
Right.
barking dog, they're going to then go and have the conversation with that person. And then they have 1 occurrence, 2 occurrence. I don't know how many occurrences you can have with noise levels. Or if you have a jam band in the, in the garage.
for sure.
And that's more so, I think we have those barriers currently to set that up. And that's where I don't want to make sure, or I want to make sure that we're not overstepping, land use. Because I think we already have an ordinance officer who manages a lot of the noise. And if you do continue, and we've had this with dogs in our neighborhood where it's like, hey, they bark. Well, maybe that was just one night. If it's another night, hey, let's maybe have a conversation with them. Step 3, or maybe not have a conversation with them. Step 3 is reach out to ordinance officer. So that's where this, I feel, just from the conversation is, if there are similarities in residential uses, I want to make sure that, because most people are not going to be as savvy from, getting business licenses, go through the permit process. And I think we're going to have a lot of people breach this right here.
Yeah.
And then it's going to cost us a lot of money as a city to go and work through that. So
I think you definitely hit the issue on the head that has been talked about at each meeting is like, what is consistent with how we've done other things? What is within our purview with land use? What's excessive? I'll just share for food for thought. One thing that as a staff perspective, I've struggled with is thinking like, do we want to kind of no holds barred, allowed someone to build something that is pretty likely to violate noise ordinance? Or do we want to get in front of that and say, we're not going to wait for it to become an issue. We're going to maybe put some regulations that keep it from being built in a way that will violate it. Or the flip side of the coin is saying, no, we're going to just let it be handled as it comes up. Maybe it's an issue, maybe it's not. And I think that is a really big struggle in this, is saying, we want to put some guardrails to try to prevent the issues from happening. do we want to kind of wait until maybe the issues arise? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, and address it then. And that's, I think, a big challenge in this, is
Yeah.
knowing how to do that.
We've tried to be very flexible with the noise study requirement. So if you're building a basketball court and that's how you intend to use it, and your noise mitigation study is written accordingly, that might be a different bar to clear than if you are specifically building a pickleball court, where the noise impact is different. So we're allowing some flexibility and some discretion by whoever's applying in how they're going to mitigate the noise based on how they're intending to use it. It's not a perfect solution, and I don't know that there is, because I think we've heard at every level we've talked about this, and if you have 5 people around the table, you have 5 slightly different opinions on what the best solution is, and that is consistent whether you ask the public or the city council or the planning commission or even city staff. So we've tried to find this middle ground that allows the right to use and construct sport courts, but establishes, like Samantha was saying, what we've tried to draft as a reasonable permit process to get there and try to head off some potential impacts before they happen. So that someone doesn't invest $50,000 in a pickleball court, it immediately creates an issue because they haven't gone through any sort of process, and we're straight into enforcement on that.
And I think it's too, we've talked about this, is balancing the land, the rights of a person to enjoy their own private property and not be impacted by their neighbors. And we're not going to do the lawnmower and the power saw, and those are very different than building something that is potentially consistent noise, disrupting your own ability to enjoy your property too, so I think it's figuring out, how do we balance that? How do we not do something so that people can build sport courts, but the building of that and the use of that does not infringe on the rights of neighbors to enjoy their own property? I mean, what is that? And I think this ordinance is trying to do that. Because it's not always going to be a silent neighborhood. I mean, that's not reality. So, but how do we balance both things being able to happen?
I think an interesting thought to add to what Commissioner Steinman said there is all of the places where we don't do this. And we just talked about one. If I have a home-based business that's a dog boarding, is that highly likely to at times exceed 70 decibels? Absolutely. Highly likely. But we don't say, if you're going to build a concrete slab for that, build a kennel or whatever you want, we don't say you have to go through these same hoops.
An interesting parallel, the same example, yeah.
But the clarification that this ordinance only applies over 500 square feet. So it's making some assumptions that the sport court is large in size. So a little pad or a landscaping pad generally isn't going to be as impactful as a large patio.
But you've just argued the same argument I made, which is if I pour a dog kennel, which is not that large and wouldn't apply anyway, because it's not called a sports court.
Yeah.
Those dogs are going to bark. And at times they're going to be annoying to neighbors, but we don't require that use to jump through these same hoops.
I think one struggle we talked about, if I might, just again, for those who weren't here, maybe last, is, not wanting to be in a position where maybe a pickleball court gets built to great personal expense. And then the city's in the position of saying, okay, you violating this and you have to tear it out or you have to stop doing it. And then the response might be, well, then why did you let me build it in the first place? And so there's been discussion too, to like kind of a different direction of, well, maybe there needs to be more education given where it's saying, hey, you build this thing, consider yourself warned that this is a possibility. So that was one option too that was talked about of, just it's not a good position or a position the city I think likes to be in to say to, stop doing the thing that you spent all this money to do. And so
yeah, I don't think we want to be punitive. We want to be able to.
Again, though, that challenge applies to anything you might do. You might build a swimming pool, which is very expensive and violate the noise ordinance. And we don't stop people from building swimming pools under this same kind of ordinance.
I think-
Dog kennel, all of these things are a fairly big expense
Sure.
that you could say the dog barks, you have to tear it out.
I
But
think
we don't.
One thing we've heard, and I don't have a pickleball court next to me, so I don't have experience as a neighbor. But we have heard some unique concerns about the impact of pickleball. Differently maybe than we've heard concerns about other things, and so that may be why certainly not everything comes to this point of regulation, but you know, these unique concerns that have been brought up about the impact specifically of some of that noise, I think has precipitated this being discussed.
Do you think we get more complaints about pickleball or dogs?
Dogs.
Dogs.
We have more dogs in the city than pickleball courts.
Yeah.
Exponentially, we require licenses and, you know, there are dog regulations that every single dog owner has to abide by and can be enforced, but yeah, I mean. Clearly, we get more
Pretty easy.
complaints about it, yeah.
I think there's ways to mitigate. So if let's just kind of play out the example. If somebody invests $50,000 in a pickleball court. And the neighbors are not happy about it. You know, let's just say this happened 2 months ago. And somebody didn't realize the moratorium was there. I don't know.
Sure.
But we now have this situation. Fast forward, there's ways to mitigate it. There's equipment that they can use for sound. It's not like they have to tear that up, you know, go through that process of going through that. But it's just like with a dog, if you use a different paddle or if you bring your dog in,
Sure.
that's how you mitigate it. With this, hey, use a different paddle, use a different ball, get down below that 60 decibel. I believe that was the regulations. That help.
65, I believe is.
Okay, and dogs, I think decibels like 80 to 110
Can
is,
be, yeah.
I guess one concern because we talked about that approach too, right? And like one concern we've heard there is some have said, does the muffling equipment really make that big of a difference? And you know, like, is it really possible? And that's just something we don't have a ton of information with. It's like, is it possible? We know it's possible to bring in a barking dog, right? Like, is it possible, I guess is the question, with muffling equipment to bring it down below? I don't know. And then the other concern sometimes or frequently that's been brought up in this topic is also the frequency, where I don't know candidly if muffling equipment addresses the frequency impact of it. I know that's been a concern for a lot of people too, so.
Yeah.
I mean, again, just all things to consider. I don't have a personal thing here. I'm trying to really guide you guys to, but these are all the different avenues we've kind of like explored as we've.
I mean,
Talk about
it's not, it's not easy. I mean, and I just really feel there has to be a balance of how someone can there needs to be some regulations, and if someone's building something that's going to cause noise, there has to be some guardrails in place to minimize. I mean, neighbors are still going to hear it. I mean, we're just trying to reduce it. We can't eliminate it. And there has to be a way to balance it. I mean, so.
Well, if there's not consensus on a direction yet, it definitely sounds like there's consensus on it being a big issue that you guys probably want to keep talking about or, you know, exploring. And I think, again, there's still a lot of public sentiment about this. And so, you know, maybe in the business session, we'll hear some more interesting feedback for you guys to take under consideration, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
Our role here is to be advisory to the city commission.
That's
Making a
correct.
recommendation.
So I'm grateful I don't have to make the decision on this, other than to have an opinion about it.
That's correct, yes. So the planning commission with a legislative item like if it were a rezone, a zoning text amendment, which is what this is, or a general plan amendment, those type of projects. Rather than being the approval authority, the commission would vote to make a recommendation for or against a certain item, and then the city council would be the approval authority there. So you are correct.
I think in this
We can have
case,
opinions.
if we get to the vote and there is not consensus, I think what the council would appreciate is regardless of how you vote on this and what it looks like, to provide some findings for why you're voting that way. Because I think it's gonna, this isn't unique. The council's gonna have the same
For sure.
kind of struggle with this. So having as much of your rationale and findings as possible will be helpful when we take it to that level.
Commissioner Chapel?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just, kind of looking at the time and we had discussed continuing again until, Chair Mills is back.
Mhm.
There's no language here for how that continuing motion would occur. And I want to keep my
Be good to
Robert's
have it.
rules in good working order here. And so if we were, it's just requesting that, make a motion that we continue.
Move to
No.
continue the
Move
item.
to continue, do we have a
We
public?
can't do in this meeting.
Not-
You don't
not-
have to do it.
Right,
Yeah.
no, I'm sorry.
in
I'm-
the-
I'm-
right.
I'm thinking of-
He's extra.
Trying to be ready.
Good job.
So, with
Appreciate that.
respect to that, do we have anything that needs to happen with respect to public comment? That remains open. It is already closed. I
I
can't
believe
recall.
that
We kept it,
it was
we
kept open in the
It was
last,
kept
and it
open.
would be, I believe, and I think Commissioner Evler can confirm for me because he's so good with this stuff. And Maria too, if you have thoughts on this, I think it would be that you would, with the public hearing in the next meeting, keep it open on that part of the item.
I think it's the best course of action too.
If of course that's what you want to do, but I think you would.
You can-
probably
you can-
state
You can
that
do
now.
either or,
Okay,
but we should probably just keep it open if we do continue it.
The item itself is a hearing and possible action. So if you continue the whole item, I think you're moving that whole thing to the next meeting.
Perfect. Okay, great discussion as usual about this
you
topic.
guys
Um,
hit a lot of big ones today.
yeah, for sure. So we just have one thing,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
okay, great. We're adjourned. See you next door.
Maria, motion by.
Did we actually vote?
Oh, all in favor,
Aye.
sorry.
I think.
Aye.
Second by Commissioner.
Aye, okay.
You're doing great.
Sorry, I forgot about the vote.